Welcome back. We're talking about episodes 7 and 8 of Berlin Alexanderplatz today. And in these episodes, Franz Bieberkopf has gotten in a terrible accident while he was unknowingly committing a crime, and he has lost his arm. And as the episode starts out, he's living at his friend's house, Ava and Herbert, and he's staying there, and he doesn't really have a plan or anything. He's just kind of recuperating and kind of getting his head together. And as the as the seventh episode progresses, he help me out here. I'm blanking on what.
He decides to participate in the underworld, in the black market.
Right. There's a bunch of stuff that happens before that. Like he's kind of in this kind of, the way I see these two episodes is kind of like a junction episode where he's been descending and descending and kind of trying to keep his head above water and descending, and then now he's kind of at his lowest point. And
yes.
And over the course of this episode, he kind of becomes more and more, he gets into a very nihilistic mood, and he's kind of, you can kind of see he's overcome some very base temptations. There's a interlude in this episode has two of my favorite scenes in it, where he's in Ava and Herbert's house, and he's kind of just dwelling there and kind of dithering around in their house, and he has this kind of conversation with himself about anxiety, and he's walking around the house, and he goes in the bathroom and he flushes the toilet, and then he just kind of says to himself, well, I got to get out on the street, and I have to push myself out there, and whatever comes, and I have one arm now, and it's kind of it's in a strange way, it's kind of a encouraging and uplifting interlude there. But so he goes out in the street, but the first place that he runs into is this kind of a secluded little street of hookers and just utter debauchery, and there's this strange little guy there in a white suit that's kind of drawing him in and trying to sell him the wares of this place, and
yes, to give him the whore of Babylon who feeds on the blood of the saints.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. I was tempted to go into a discourse on the Book of Revelation and how it's about the lower self, but I think that's really kind of summed up in this little interlude with him, where he's being tempted, but in a very, very base way that he's kind of gotten past by now, and he's able to at least that part of his animal self, it's kind of like passe, and it's not really tempting for him anymore, but it's still kind of harassing him. But he gets out of that little interlude, and he walks, and as soon as he walks out of there, he looks across the street and he sees a sign that says Berliner Kinder, or like that means child of Berlin, I think. And it's for a bar, and it shows a little child drinking a mug of beer. So he goes into the bar, and this scene is really, I just think that Gunther Lamprecht should have a statue built for him because of this scene. There's some kind of honorary medal or something like that, because the scene, he goes into the bar and he orders, there's a couple of floozies in there, and they're having a good time and laughing and everything, and he's in a jovial mood, and he sits down and he orders 3 beers and a schnapps, and he begins speaking as the beers, and he has a kind of discourse.
Right, he talks to the beers.
Yeah.
and he he does both dialogue. In a low voice, he's talking, and then in a high voice, it's the beer talking. And through the whole time, one of the women at the bar is laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing. The laughing goes on for minutes. It seems to go on forever. Yeah. And then he walks off with the woman at the bar, who's laughing.
Yeah. He speaks to each drink, and each drink has a kind of different purpose in his little scenario, and so he at one point he speaks to the schnapps, and he says, "Who are you, little fellow?" And the schnapps says, "I've been distilled over years." He says, "I'm very sorry," and he has this whole discourse with the beers, and it's really a very beautiful scene in its way, and it shows a lot about the character. But so then he exits the bar with this girl and goes to another nightclub, and through this whole thing, he's just kind of drifting. And he also has this conversation with the young woman in the first bar, and he says something to the effect of, "This life is all there is. There's nothing after this." And he's kind of moving into this very nihilistic state of kind of I would say hopelessness, but there's still this kind of really substratum of hope in his whole character. There's just this kind of joviality in him, but he's really moving into this area of like just total oblivion and not caring so much about who he hurts and other. He's giving up in a sense on his whole "I'm gonna go straight" thing that he promised in the first episode, and that comes up in the beginning of episode 7. He goes through that whole dialogue at the beginning of I said I was going to go straight, and when I got out of Tegel and the houses, the roofs of the houses were falling, and I looked at the sky and I said I would go straight, and then as he becomes more and more nihilistic, and he at the end of episode 7 he meets this guy who kind of gives him this whole spiel about stealing isn't stealing, it's just borrowing, and when they told you that you were going into the army, they were actually, you could say they were kidnapping you, and but they tell you you're serving your country, and he's giving him this whole kind of I don't know what you would call it, he's kind of twisting around everything to make immorality seem okay, or ethics seem worthless in a sense. So that's how the first episode ends. But in that, or the 7th episode, but in this episode also, there's this interaction with Mech, where he sees also. Well, let me begin. In the very start of episode 7. It takes place in Pum's office. Pum's the gangster. And
they're talking about whether to knock him off or not.
Whether to kill him or not. And that really plays into the whole, he's gone so low in his whole journey that he's like on the edge of just total annihilation, and he's on the edge of death, and he's coming very close to being just totally obliterated and murdered by these guys, but somehow it kind of rides the edge of that, and it doesn't really happen. And Mech is kind of ambivalent. Yeah, what did you think about that?
And Reinhold, and Reinhold, who apparently has risen in authority there because he feels that he can yell at Pum, and Pum takes it. He convinces them. He says Franz isn't gonna rat on us. He's not that kind of guy. He won't do that. And he says it very strongly. And it's not like he likes Franz. He has had his conflicts with Franz. He's tried to manipulate Franz.
Right.
Franz is kind of out of his grasp, but he understands that Franz is not the kind of character who is going to rat them out. Franz has lost an arm, all this, But Franz is not going to be that kind of low.
Right.
Or high, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
he is not the kind of person who's going to interfere in another person's life that way.
Yeah, and Reinhold's not
in his nature.
Reinhold's not saying that because he admires that about him. He's just like,
right.
This is the kind of fool that this guy is, that he's not going to tell. Because remember, we have that backstory with Reinhold that he gives when he first meets Franz, where he says he was involved in some kind of political, I forget, like some kind of bombing or something like that. And it's kind of apparent that he snitched his way out of being punished for that, right? So he really doesn't have any scruples whatsoever about anything. But in the end of that scene in Plum's office, he's kind of saying, yeah, we should kill him, right? Am I wrong?
Right.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
No, but then they just don't. There's not really an explanation for that.
Yeah.
It leaves that scene, and they're not going to kill him.
Right.
It's like it's not worth it.
Yeah, and they kind of decide later on to pay him off, and the funny looking guy with the glasses goes and tries to pay him off, and
he won't take it.
Right. Well, Ava thinks that the guy's gonna kill them, and she freaks out, right? And then Franz has a feigning spell and faints, and then the guy just splits. Yeah, with his hand in his pocket. But yeah, I think I really kind of saw these two episodes as kind of like a junction point where he's really kind of reached bottom, and he's really kind of he's going against his own oath to himself to go straight by the end of episode 7, and of course he's getting all the benefits of that that we see in episode 8. He's again, he's kind of riding high, like we always see him doing when he starts to sin again or to fall again. He has a period where he's having fun and riding high and feeling good about himself during that period of time.
And he looks quite different. He's dressed in expensive clothes.
Yeah.
He's carrying himself in a different way, not in quite such a lumbering way. It's like he's grown into the clothes. And it's really pretty extraordinary. Ava says, "We have a girl for you."
Yeah.
And he's wondering, what the hell does this mean? And it's like they picked up this country girl at the station. She's come to Berlin. You get the feel. I have the feel of that. She's pretty baffled by everything, and she's beautiful and fresh. I mean, she's a totally different kind of woman at first. And he doesn't like her name, so her name is Emily, and he doesn't like her name, so he wants to call her Maria. She doesn't like that, and they decide Mieze. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Mieze.
Yeah.
And then it gets very idyllic. They're in a rowboat, kind of a long scene in a rowboat on a lake, and then they're playing in a wood, and Franz falls and hits his head. He's been blindfolded. It was a hide and seek, which is a silly game to play in a wood. These are really urban people. They don't get that.
Yeah.
And he falls. He hits his head. He's bleeding. She takes care of him. She loves him so. Everything seems to be going really well, idyllically, practically. And then the landlady delivers a letter to her. He reads it. It's a love letter. He goes completely nuts. And we get a long flashback of when he murdered Ida. We get the whole murder. We've had little flashbacks, but now we get a big one. And so I take that to mean that his worst fears and selves are being excited to do damage. And he goes to Eva, who suddenly jumps on him, attacks him sensually. At first, he doesn't know what the hell is going on. Then he goes with it, and it's shocking. I mean, she's been kind of this steady person for this whole thing, and within this crazy milieu where people act on impulse all the time, she's been fairly even, and suddenly she's ripping off his clothes. And when that's done, she's saying, Mies is a good girl. She's a good person. This will be okay. And how does that go? She goes to Mies and tells Mies doesn't tell her about lovemaking, but tries to make it good with Mies. Mies says it's all over, isn't it? And then it's not, and then it ends very inconclusively. We don't really,
Well, he kind of says like, this is the way. This is all happening again, or this is the way that he's kind of accepted this time that no one is innocent, or he can't expect innocence out of women. He can't expect this idyllic thing in the situation that he's in, right? During that whole scene, where the whole killing Ida scene, there's that voiceover talking about the women that end up having to whore themselves, right? Like, did you notice that the whole thing about
yes,
we lost all our money, and then my sister-in-law and my wife had to start whoring themselves, and so he's having a whole all of this. It's reawakening those elementals in him, that of like emasculation and jealousy, and but I wanted to go back to the interaction with Mech in the subway when he sees Mech, and he has this whole interaction with him. And what did you think about that?
Well, they see each other, and he remembers what it was to run into Mac several years ago, when they were really happy to see each other. Yeah. They see each other now, and it's very solemn, and they don't like seeing each other really right now. And it's as though they've been revealed to each other, and their feelings of friendship are gone, but their feelings of connection aren't gone. And it's like a piece. Each is seeing the other as proof of a lost life. Was my feeling. You run into somebody on the subway, and you see how far you've fallen, how far your hopes have been dashed. Was my impression.
What did you think about the very end of that scene where he asks him about his father, and have you ever lost a father, or do you know what it's like to lose a father? How did you interpret that?
It's one of the only times anybody talks about their past, not like they even have families.
Yeah.
And I thought Franz, maybe I'm not getting this right, but Franz didn't really answer him. There wasn't a sense of, yes, I've had losses too, I understand what you mean. There was a blank. The meeting for both of them was a blank wall that there was no going around. It just had to end.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Okay, so in the scene where he first meets her, and she comes in and she sits on his lap, and she says to him, Ava's name wasn't Ava in the beginning, it was it was Emily, just like me.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Right.
says, yeah, I named her Ava. And then he names Mitza, he names her Marie. He's like, I want to call you Marie.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got Eve and Mary, right? So Eve,
Mm-hmm. Right.
Eve to me represents his soul in descent, like the soul being
Mm-hmm.
attracted by matter and becoming more and more material and becoming more and more base. Um, Mary is the soul in redemption, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
so he's at this junction point, and it is the halfway point of all these episodes in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
where he's going from Eve to Mary, right? And he's kind of trying to redeem himself, trying to come up from the bottom of the pool and kick himself up from the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been kind of gifted to him, like through his suffering, that like all of a sudden he has this like amazing. It's like the sun is rising. This is like a
Yes,
sunrise.
that's what he says.
Right?
It's like the sun rising.
Yeah, and it's funny because then like you said, in the next scene, there's this long scene of them on the water, right? And Mary is always associated with the water, like the Stella Mar,
Mm-hmm.
and the and and it's kind of like primordial matter that he's had to descend into, and then bring his way up again out of, just kind of like the whole story of Genesis and of humanity
Mm-hmm.
just in
Mm-hmm.
general, right? So I thought that when I figured that out, like it was kind of like undeniable that it's like Eve and Mary, right? And so then when I
Right.
thought about him talking to Mech, and he says, do you know what it's like to lose your father, and he's talking about, do you know what it's like to be so
God.
distant from God, like, do you know what it's like to be
God.
like on the total
Yes.
outer edge of the universe and just so distant from God like I am right now, right? And then that
Right.
and then at the start of the next episode, in episode 8, he goes into he's knocking on the door of the bar, and he goes into the bar, and he's just totally insane, right? Like he's he reads that story about the guy killing his children and his wife killing himself, and he's just laughing at the top of his lungs, and the bartender's like,
Thing. I like the guy. I think he's a good guy.
yeah. So he's really like on the outer edges of sanity and morality and ethics, at least externally. Like his personality is really out there, and the bartender's like, I've never seen you be this way before. Like, what the hell is wrong with you, man? Like, what's going on with you? So yeah, the whole sense through these 2 episodes is that he's really, really, really out there, but he's kind of he's going to go through some experience that's going to snap him back, and I think the experience with Mitza is kind of a snapping back, and he ends up having to look at her faults and accept her for who she
Mm-hmm.
is, right? And accept this material world for what it is, and be forgiving of it instead of murdering it, and I think that also him losing the arm that he kills Ida with is
Mm-hmm.
obviously
Right. Right.
karmic and symbolic.
That's very good. That's very good. Yes, he lost the arm he killed Ida with, and now he's being faced with an Ida-like situation, and he has reached the point where he will not kill Meats,
Right.
and she doesn't know how close she's come, because we see him just go nuts about this.
Yeah.
And then Eva, first she jumps him, which I still think is mysterious. First she jumps him, and as you say, in that iconography, it's Eve jumping him, and he lets that happen. It's practically a rape on her part.
Yeah.
At first, he doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah, I didn't
What are you
think of
doing?
that. Yeah, it is kind of like a rape.
Are you sure Herbert's not going to come home? Are you, yes, I'm sure. As she's taking his clothes off and all this stuff, it is. And then she gets him. I'm going to talk to Meese. Why are you going to do that? Because I'm going to do it. and very forceful. And when she tells Meese says, "Oh, this means it's all over, doesn't it?" And no, this can, and she's telling Franz she's a good girl. And then the episode ends, I thought, inconclusively. Okay, now they're back, and now what happens? And I almost went on to the next one, except I couldn't take 3 in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that my explanation kind of gives an explanation for her jumping him like that, because
yes.
she is the descended soul, like she is Eve in sin now, and she is that steady presence, though, at the same time. Like, the soul is never completely destroyed, and she's also that thing that, like, keeps everything afloat. Like, she pays his rent, and
right.
She's just always there to kind of save him in the end, But the soul is plastic in itself, It's not it's eternal in a sense, but it's not. It has its wavering and changes with the personality and with the journey, But
oh yes, it's not static at all.
Yeah, right. But yeah, that I don't know what. So what did you think about this? The character, the guy who's getting him into stealing and like drawing him into the underworld.
But he's in this general milieu, and people are attracted to him, kind of mysteriously. Whether it's thugs or gangsters or women, he is a kind of light, whereby people are drawn to him. They want him around, and a whole spectrum of people relate to him, and he is really more constant than he seems. Franz is Franz. He really is the soul. He exudes a brightness no matter what's going on, even though he has committed a terrible sin. And he is aware that he has that level of self-awareness where he says, "Oh, what's the line?" At the beginning of the 8th episode, he says, "I've been taking courses, private lessons. I've had a lot to learn." And so he summarizes all the episodes that have gone before by "I am learning. These are courses. These are private lessons. I'm aware that I'm learning, not in an intellectual way, but in this quite elemental, primordial way."
Yeah.
And so the actor is projecting awareness at the same time as he's projecting a lack of awareness, which is a feat I've never seen before. That the way he sustains it, the variations through which he sustains it. So at the top of episode 8, these are private lessons. I have a lot to learn. And behind everything he's doing, there is the sense of he's taking private lessons with a lot to learn. I don't think anybody else in the story feels an awareness that they're on a journey. They come and go. It's a very difficult life where everything can change in an instant, where violence can happen in an instant. But Franz knows he's on a journey. He's taking private lessons. He has a lot to learn. That's his function to himself. He's not learning it for anybody else. He's learning it for himself. And And these private lessons, I was struck by the sense of theater, in the sense of each scene is shot so that you're in it. You can't look away from it. And it's one play within a play, within a play, within a play, within a play. Each scene is a passageway in a labyrinth. It is not a typical, or archetypical is what I mean, journey from darkness to light. It is being lost in a great structure, and going from room to room, and not knowing which direction you're going in. Once you've been through a couple of rooms, and this and that room, and this room, and the next room, and the next room, you don't know which way you're headed. Franz always has a sense of looking at what's around him and making what's around him do. You know, he sits in the bar and he talks to the beers. And he's making a spectacle of himself, and he's aware of that. And the women are laughing, and they're kind of his audience. He doesn't care about the other people in the bar. The camera doesn't focus on them. The cackling goes on through the whole scene, and it somehow relieves him. It's quite a mysterious scene, really. It reminded me of Chaplin's dance with the forks and the rolls do the dancing in Gold Rush, but in a very much more stark and fundamental, primordial level. Nothing poetic about it, and yet it's a very poetic scene. That's what I'm searching for. It's a transcendent scene.
Yeah.
Somehow he relieves himself of burden, and it's a conscious thing. He goes, "I want 3 beers and a schnapps," and he sits down with his beers, and he knows exactly what he's going to do, and he starts talking to the beers. And somehow this play, because he's playing like a kid, it's the kind of thing a little kid would do. Somehow this play brings him forward in himself. And on this journey through the underworld, there's this moment of purity. But it happens with beers and schnapps in this fairly low-life bar. And then this woman attaches herself to him, the one who was cackling. And they go for part of a journey, and then another thing, and another thing, and another room, and another room. But always Franz comes back to this point of learning. I am somebody learning something. And if you look at Franz as the soul, a representation of the human soul on a human journey, the soul taking the human journey to learn, then what am I trying to say? Then there's a constancy. I mean, he's in almost every scene. There's a constancy of if you open it up, because it's called Berlin, it's not called France. Here's this soul in the heart of Berlin, on one of the lowest levels of Berlin, in the time, and they want you to know it's 1928. It's a time of important elections in Europe. And and they're locating it at this pivotal point between Germany's attempt at a republic and what's coming very quickly, the rise of Hitler and Germany's taking that turn. So we're at a purposeless point. Then the collective is going to have a purpose, but Franz, within all of that, there is this pure soul who is trying to learn from all these sort of experiences. So when this novel is published after the war, it becomes a bestseller, a critical and popular acclaim.
It was published in It was published in like 1930 or something.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But it became popular after the war, you say?
No. It was popular in like 1930, 31, I guess. Yeah. No, it came out during that time. Actually, it was written during that time.
Oh, I don't know why I transposed it. Well, erase that theory, but there's, but it actually still works. It's they're coming into the depths of the depression, and it's going to be a totally transformative time. That doesn't mean positive, doesn't necessarily mean negative, but it's going to be a totally transformative time. And this is the beginning of that time. We don't know. We can't put what its future is going to be on it. This is a seed time. And through it all, you have this consciousness that we call Franz. And he's trying to redeem or to learn, or are they the same thing?
I think that there's a position you can take where you're standing outside of France and almost in a kind of looking at France as God, like just looking at him from above, and he's going through something extremely important. He's a soul going through something and he's very fortunate to be going through it. But the way that we're conditioned is that only, the only important people are people like Alexander the Great or somebody, like those are the people going through a major giant, making giant changes in the world, and, Napoleon or something like that, but
right.
There's a I think it's Buddha says that the man who conquers himself is more than the man who conquers many worlds, and
yes.
So he's just this kind of, he's down in the dregs of society, and he's just one of the faces in the crowd and everything, but he's going through something that's very, very special and very, very transformative for a human being. And I think that's really kind of one of the beautiful things about this story is that somebody can go through something extremely profound like this experience he's going through and not have, well, I guess he had a book written about him, but not be, somebody famous or somebody that, common people go through these things, and they're
yes.
very fortunate. I mean, it looks like he's in hell, but this is the most valuable part of life. This is your whole life purpose, in a sense. It's kind of being compressed into this one life, this journey that he's going through. And when you were talking before, the proverb about the lilies in the field and how they grow came up to me, because only by looking back at who he was does he realize the growth that he's
Yes.
achieved, right? Like you,
Mm-hmm.
no spiritual growth is actually perceptible because
Right.
the spirit isn't like you can't stretch a flower out to make it grow. It just has to be in the sun, you know, like it has to,
Mm-hmm.
he has to take in that sun all the time
Mm-hmm.
and put himself in that place and he grows through that, and he can't force himself to grow. He just has to kind of let these things happen to him, and it becomes anxious, and he becomes a struggle and strenuous and everything. But um, this is, he's, you know, it's like a tree going through the seasons and the wind and the rain and the ice and then the scorching heat. And you know, and the name of the episode, I think that the eighth episode, it's
The sun warms you, but sometimes it
yeah,
burns.
sometimes it burns. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that proverb really came to mind to me. It's one that I think about a lot because we sometimes we wonder where we're at, and we think we are lost, you know. And I think that he's at that point right now where he doesn't see that constancy in his life. He doubts himself, and he's doubting the entire venture. He's doubting
Mm-hmm.
ethics and morality and being a good person, and but despite it all, he's still a good person. You know, he's like, he's telling that villain guy, like, you know, I'm sorry I wasn't at work today, but I'll be there tomorrow. You can count on me.
Right. Yes.
He's still loyal, you know, and yeah, you can watch him. I mean, in the very first episode, he's definitely in this weird kind of innocence, but it's an instinctual innocence
Mm-hmm.
of an animal. You know, it's like a
Right.
some, you know, it's animals do horrible things, but they're kind of not to blame for it because they're in this
Yes.
state of ignorance. You know, they don't know any better. But
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, he's growing into a real human being and an expression of spirit that's higher than animals, you know, and he's constantly being tempted by his animal self. And I really do think that whole interlude with the Whore of Babylon guy, you know, it kind of,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's there to kind of show a progression that he can look at this and just kind of pass it off and be like, oh yeah, you know, I've seen this kind of stuff before, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's not really tempting to me, you know, but it's still always there. And he's also,
Mm-hmm.
he's getting past, in a sense, he's getting past lust, you know, like in these two
Mm-hmm.
episodes, he's getting past that like blind lust thing that he had before. um and but of course, as he's making his way past that, and he's struggling past that, the obstacles get harder and harder, you know, and the women throw themselves at him, and he sees new levels of need and lust, and new, you know, like a kind of an emotional need that he's having to deal
Mm-hmm.
with now, that he has to get past this idea that a woman can be this idyllic little girl that's totally innocent, you know, which is just totally,
Mm-hmm.
was totally foolish for him
Yeah.
to get into that mode of thought in the first place. But it's kind of
Right.
something that every man has to go through at some point, you know, whether they're a teenager or Franz Bieberkopf, you know. Women are human
Mm-hmm.
too, and they're not. you can't you can't put them on a pedestal, and they're just as fucked up as you are, you know. So
Yep.
yeah.
Well, I think you. I think these. I think you really get it. I think. What you describe is what's really there, and I think it's really important to underline that this journey, this struggle, this uh, this initiation in a way of the soul is not reserved for for people on an educated level, for people on a class level, for people with generations of sophistication behind them. Mm-hmm. This is an utterly unsophisticated person, and meeting life in a completely raw way, and his sense of the soul is really huge. It glows in him. And these journeys are going on in every area of life. That the human journey isn't so different deep within people. It's what we have most in common.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just different, different degrees.
And yes, and you know, the film kind of tempts you into feeling superior to Franz, but then draws you into the experience, into his experiences, and you wind up thinking. I certainly had the impression at times. I go, I've done versions of this.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I'm not really a stranger here.
No.
I'm not looking down from some high level.
Yeah.
Actually, there's some of my story in this story.
Yeah.
And his resilience and his insistence of, I'm learning. These are private lessons. I have a lot to learn. Well, I've certainly been there, and all my reading and all my this and all my that doesn't make a difference in that fundamental way.
Or how much money you have. Yeah.
Or how much money.
Yeah.
How much money I have or how much money I don't have. Yeah. Doesn't make a difference in that fundamental way.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, we have a lot to learn. And Franz never lets you forget that. And the film never lets you forget it. Here, I'm going to put you in this room with this bunch of people. And the only way to get out of it is to go through the experience.
Yeah, and in that first, the first little part with Franz in the 7th episode, he talks about how the prison isn't that much different from the outside.
Yes. And yes. That's the first thing he talks about.
Right.
I wrote that line down. That's the first thing he really says.
Yeah. And he's created his own prison in a sense, you know, like he's created this humanity has created this situation for itself.
Yes.
And these kind of urban prisons that people have to experience for themselves, and this real conglomeration of materialism that they have to experience and go through. But it's a true egalitarianism, you know, what we're talking about. It's the genuine egalitarianism that, you know, I mean, I've known extremely wealthy people that had extremely tragic things happen to them, you know, like the wealth didn't make it. But we were conditioned to kind of look at wealth as some kind of accomplishment, like somehow this person is spiritually advanced, and that's how, you know, they have this plentiful life, when it's, you know, it's the motive and how you experience that, and sometimes you have to go through that experience of having a bunch of money and a bunch of wealth, but being spiritually destitute at the same time, or, you know.
Yes.
It's yeah.
Well, it's like the old rich man says toward at the beginning, in the beginning of Citizen Kane, where the reporter said, "Well, you've made a lot of money," and the old man says, "It's not so difficult to make a lot of money when all you want to do is make a lot of money."
Yeah, right.
and and in the life of Franz, he doesn't really care about material things.
Right.
He, you're seeing him in an expensive suit, but he hasn't changed. You see him. He always takes what's there and makes the best of it. And in that sense, he has no ambition at all.
Yeah, he's being taken care of by a kind of existential caretaker. Like he has an abundance to him that's not material, and
right,
and that kind of sustains him.
Yeah. So he's not asking much of this world, but he does want the question answered: if I'm not going to die, how am I going to live? and he's been let out of prison in a very real way in the beginning of the first episode. He begins to go quite crazy, and then he makes his decision really to live with the understanding that I have a lot to learn. These are private lessons.
Yeah, a really interesting scene is when the villain, the guy who's selling stolen goods, comes to his room, and they're discussing. Franz is like, I want to do what you do, and the guy kind of says, well, we can try it out, and Franz goes into this whole spiel about how much he looks down on the other newspaper sellers, and how this like straight kind of menial job is just so awful for him, and then that's when he really makes the break with trying to go straight. He says, like, how could I be so foolish as to think,
yes,
Franz Bieberkopf could go straight or be straight. I thought that was really interesting. What did you think of that?
I thought that, he'd been tricked into that robbery. He lost an arm. And he was saying, what can I do with, how can I earn a living this way?
Yeah.
And I think he was looking at his options and going, a guy with one arm can't do squat in the straight world.
Yeah, but is he just making excuses? I
don't think so. I think he's being practical.
Just before that scene, he's sitting with Miss Bast, right? And she's like, you need to stop moping, and you need to stop feeling sorry for yourself. And,
right.
Go sell tie clips or something. Set up a
tie clips. Right. Go sell tie clips.
and you can. I don't know. It's just a weird couple of scenes for me because I don't know. Should he go and sell tie clips? It kind of gives you this kind of moral conundrum of selfishness. Because Jesus would say, go and sell tie clips, Franz. But Franz is like, no, I'm gonna go and steal things and be morally bad because I'm in such a crummy place. I'm gonna use this as an excuse to be unethical.
I don't think at this point strict ethics and strict morality get pretty murky.
Right.
And if he plays it straight, he sees some hope for himself in going crooked. He sees some kind of light there, some kind of maneuverability.
But even though every time he does that, he gets his ass kicked.
Yes. And but getting your ass kicked, I think, is part of the purification. I don't see him. I don't see him on a spiritual journey selling tie clips. Where, and him specifically, for somebody else it would be.
Yeah.
Somebody else could see in the humility of, could get satisfaction from the humility and not be humiliated. But for Franz, no, he's not that guy.
Yeah.
If he's to have possibilities, he is going to have to do it in some way that's not manual labor.
Yeah, and it does kind of revolve around that scene where he's like puttering around the house, and he's like, I can't just hang around the house and feel anxious and restless. Like, he has to get out in the street, And,
yes, and what's he going to do out in the street? Sell tie clips?
Yeah.
It's just because then he feels sorry for the one-armed guy selling tie clips.
Right.
and that's not his idea of going straight. And I don't blame him.
Yeah.
So it might be showing the limits of my ethics, but
well, he's gotten past pimping. Like, he's not pimping anymore, right?
Right.
And he's not. I mean, there's other things that he's like not gonna do, and so I don't know. Selling stolen goods doesn't look as bad to him.
Well, also in the larger economic picture,
yeah,
selling stolen goods is part of the economy.
Right. Sure.
I don't care where you are or in what system you're in. Selling stolen goods is part of the economy.
Yeah.
It's part of the gross national product. With the emphasis on the gross, but it's a strata of capitalism, and it's a strata of socialism. It's one of the things they have in common. So it may sound cynical, but selling stolen goods is not necessarily exploiting people.
Well, it's funny too because
it's not pimping. It's not selling drugs.
Yeah, but it's also a step up from him doing the thing with Pums where they're actually going to the place and robbing the place.
Yes.
It's like, yes. It's one thing removed from that.
And for him, in the world he's in, it's definitely a step up from pimping.
Yeah.
He has come to realize that broads are human beings, as he puts it. They're human too. It took him about 6 episodes to get there, but they're human too. And so his eyes slowly open. I guess I'm saying, when you see him in that suit, in those expensive clothes, it suits him.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Well, he's also kind of his own boss, too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Okay, well,
no, it's fascinating. Going through one room after another with Franz Bieberkopf is really fascinating. There's only so much of it I can take in any one sitting, but it's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, are you good with that?
I'm good with it.
Okay.